And thank you, Damien. Good morning, everyone. I hope my technology is okay. I've had more problems this morning than I can possibly explain with technology. I hope it's all working fine. And I'm really excited to hear about the report that you've just raised. I think that sounds really timely and helpful. So very much thank you for the work you're doing there. You're right. A lot of this work that we're talking about today does cover DFE, but there's a really important part for MHCLG to play, I think, in the whole government levelling up agenda. And so I think one of the things I thought perhaps I'd just run through were some of the work that we've done so far in MHCLG, some of the plans that we've got for the future, a bit about the white paper, and then perhaps how that links into some of the important work you're doing, particularly on skills and some of the sort of revenue-focused funding streams that we're going to be delivering as well and are starting to deliver. I think what's really playing, and I think everyone can see that the concept of levelling up is something that the Prime Minister is personally driving. It's the central mission of this government, and he's taking a leading role in doing that. The concept of it, people always think is quite vague. I actually think it's quite clear. It's really about driving improvements in living standards, trying to improve the private sector in places where it's weak, trying to spread opportunities so people don't have to leave their hometown to get the skills they want, to go on to do the job they want, and can do that wherever they live in the country. I think you're right that a key vehicle for us to do and achieve that is to make sure we're empowering local places, whether that's councils, mayoral combined authorities, or potentially even other types of geographies, to make sure they have the resources, the money, the control devolved to them from central government to deliver some of those objectives. You're also right that a lot of the substantial policy meat, so to speak, is going to be set out later this year in a levelling up white paper that we're going to publish. A lot of that work is going on in detail now, so I think your report and your work is very timely, and we're very interested in keeping you abreast of what you've done. Already, though, listening to some of the comments about place-based investment, I would still argue that that's a really important part of delivering on the skills agenda as well, some of the capital investment. I think if you look at some of the things that we've started to deliver already and our involvement as that in that government department, I'll take the Towns Fund as an example. £3.6 billion a fund supporting over 100 towns to bring forward their own local solutions to delivering some of the problems that they see in their communities, specifically around regeneration, development, infrastructure projects that they want to see. And there are some great examples of that. So if you look at Stavley, they're using town deal funding to develop a rail innovation and training centre that's focused on green technology, so that the next generation of cleaner, faster, greener, better equipped trains are built and delivered here in the UK. If you look at what we're doing in Hartlepool, we're supporting the town with £25 million to deliver a new health and care academy, a civil engineering institute, and that's really helping to boost local training and skills and deliver high paid jobs. My favourite example, if I can, well, second favourite perhaps, my favourite is in Barrow. We're delivering a £25 million package there, and that's helping to deliver a £10.4 million learning quarter in Barrow, and that's really influential in that town's skills base and progress they can make. If you look at the demographics in Barrow, only 30% of people there hold a degree level qualification. It really severely weakens the labour market in that community. It hampers local growth. But the project we're delivering through these capital funding will help deliver a new university campus in the town. It will deliver a skills academy, and that will help go some way to fill what is frankly a higher education black spot in that particular town, and help employers ensure they have people with the right skills and to fill the gaps in the labour market that they are so constantly telling us they need. I was almost going to say favourite in Barrow. Clearly my favourite example of this is in Doncaster, because we're spending £25 million from the Towns Fund to transform the station gateway there, and that's going to be creating better transport opportunities, increasing footfall as well. So, even though those few examples are just a small part of a much bigger wave of investment, I think the broader point is that there's a lot of transformation that's going on there to improve skills and create opportunity, even though it's capital-based direct investment. That's an England-only fund. One of the stages we're taking now with the Levelling Up Fund is that is going to be delivered UK-wide, and we're starting to deliver this next round of funding now. Again, same sort of projects that it can be delivered through that can be so influential for communities. That is going to help deliver the sort of projects that we heard about at the start, roads, railways, theatres, galleries, cultural assets, heritage assets in communities too. And so that's a key pillar of our programme. Crucially, one of the points I'd make is that there is a really big role for councils in the delivery of these funds. A big part of the success of these is based on the local leadership that places provide in identifying their own solutions. You look at the town deals where we are asking towns to form boards, put together local projects, show that they can deliver those, and we're funding them to do that. So there's a really important increased role for local authorities there. But also, I think when we're looking at levelling up, which is so fundamentally about improving ultimately living standards for people and growing the private sector, we hear about that a lot, but I think it's really important to say that it's also about delivering other types of outcomes as well. So absolutely on education, also on health, also on policing, but also on some of the things that probably seem more holistic and difficult to measure as well. So whether that's pride in people's community, people's ability to improve their own quality of life, hard to measure on a scale of GDP or economic forecast, but still really important to people, and that's an important part of the agenda too. We do want to make sure that can be all delivered in conjunction with clear, good quality jobs, boosting training, growing productivity in places that have seen economic decline through the loss of industry. And again, I come back to this point that crucially the way that we want to do that is by letting local areas come forward with their own solutions. What we do not want to do is impose top-down solutions to these type of problems that different communities face, because we're not equipped to do it. They are much more effective at finding their own solutions. I think one of the other things that we have been looking at is the clear sort of causal link about local positive, virtuous cycles in the economy. It's very clear that the drivers of growth, be that employers, people, investment, are attracted to places that are already growing. So that's a really important piece of the policy work we're looking at for the Levelling Up White Paper about how we can make those sort of cycles productive, spread them right across the country. I think there's a big piece of work for us to do there. I certainly think an area where our department crosses over with all the excellent work that you're doing is taking the skills agenda and making sure we're supporting that adequately in the right way. If you look at human capital, it is quite clearly, all the evidence suggests, the most important factor in driving differences in productivity in some of these places around the country over time. And that's in addition to the role that human capital can play in individual personal well-being, some of those other things that are harder to measure as well, and helping people reach their life potential. It's also equally clear that there's big room for us to improve in this area. You only have to look at some of the stats that I'm sure that you are very, very well versed in. Almost half of the adults in our country have numeracy skills, no better than the standard we expect from an 11-year-old. Over half of the people that are currently in the workplace do not have the basic standard of digital skills that we want them employers want them to have in the modern workplace. And you see the impacts of that for employers not being able to fulfill the vacancies they want with the types of skills they want. And we do want to look at how we can address some of the market failures which have ended up delivering underinvestment in training in the UK. I think that's been a big problem too. We know that employers will only invest, they'll only expand, they'll only create skills and opportunity for people in some of these areas we want to level up if we're able to do that. Otherwise, the opposite of what we want to happen will transpire, which is that people move away from these communities into other parts of the country where they feel their skills can be better utilised and they can have more opportunity in the workplace. So there is a big opportunity for us in this Parliament, I think, to make progress here. It's quite scary when you think that the vast majority of the workforce of 2030, 2035 are already in the workplace today. So one of the things that we need to make sure it's included in this Levelling Up White Paper is ways for us to address people that are already in the workplace with proper adult educational skills, support and packages. I know that's something that the DfE are doing a huge amount on as well. One of the other things I just want to flag, if I could, Chris, was about some of the skills and revenue-based funding that we are going to go on and deliver in MHCLG, working with other government departments, particularly on the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. This is going to be a key part of some of the packages that we're going to deliver over this Parliament and beyond. It's really going to be a good part of our Levelling Up agenda. We really want to use this opportunity we have to maximise the benefit of leaving the EU by adjusting the way that we deliver these funds, because the vast majority of the feedback that we had about the previous EU structural funds was that they were too siloed, too bureaucratic. People and places were just not able to deliver the types of interventions that would really make a difference on skills and people in their community. So we want to make sure that's less prescriptive, less siloed, and more based on local insight and knowledge as well. So there's a key part there about cutting out the bureaucracy in the delivery of that fund. It's going to have core themes for investment, and we've already published that in heads of terms, in people, in skills, in communities, and local businesses, to help them create the opportunity for people who face the biggest barriers to the labour market, for instance, or all those that are most in need. So again, that's going to be a UK-wide fund, and we're already looking at how we can make sure that reaches all corners of the different parts of the UK. We'll also make sure that that ramps up over the course of the Parliament to make sure it reaches at least £1.5 billion a year from 22-23, and it's targeted at places that really need it the most. And part of that will be investing in work-based training, supplementing some of the tailor-based national programmes that I'm sure you've talked to DFE about and others, that support local skills packages that are tailored to individual council or local economic area geographies as well. There's a second portion of that fund that we are going to deliver, which will be targeted to the people that are most directly in need. So that will be bespoke skills, employment supports, programmes that are tailored to individual council or combined authority or economic geography areas as well, trying to improve cohorts for specific outcomes for specific cohorts of people. So we're going to be publishing more information about that in a framework later this year. The full investment profiles we set out at spending review later on in the year by the Chancellor. And finally, can I perhaps just highlight then the UK Community Renewal Fund, which is our sort of 1-year transitional mechanism to move towards the UK SPF. So this is an extra £220 million we're delivering this year, and really it's about trialling the freedom and flexibility that we're giving councils and local authorities, combined authorities, to deliver some of these programmes. We had the deadline for applications a couple of weeks ago. Hugely positive response from right around the country. We identified priority areas based on an index of economic need for the UK Community Renewal Fund, so that we are hugely excited about starting to work through those applications, start to deliver some as well this year. And again, that has those same core key aims in lots of respects that I've talked about for the UK SPF, developing flexible packages for skills, communities, business, projects to support people into employment too. So really important pilot. We're looking to learn from that, really in the market for thoughts about the delivery of the UK SPF. And so, where that overlaps with skills, absolutely a great area to hear more from you about how you think that should be shaped. Look, Chris, I think I've talked enough now, so I'll just say, look, thank you very much. Happy to take any questions on this, but I really do think some of these schemes we're delivering, I know your prime involvement will be with DFE in lots of ways, but are really influential. So please don't forget about the importance of how we can deliver this. Thanks for the work you're doing, and perhaps I'm back over to you to take any questions that are useful.
Thank you so much for that, Owen. Really helpful to understand where we are in the cycle with sort of government's thoughts and where the Commission can help to influence future thinking and what is sort of planned as well. Minister Hall, if I could maybe sort of start with just a couple of questions to the Chair, and then we can sort of open up sort of wider to bring sort of Damien and Michael in to answer some questions as well. I wanted to ask you, we've seen obviously sort of a number of metro mayors, most recently sort of West Yorkshire being established, and there's a sort of organic process working with local communities to make sure these are effective. But obviously it means that there are areas without sort of regional government structures that don't have the devolved skills provision. What are the government's plans to potentially further open up devolution to local areas, and will that involve further devolution of skills provision? And actually, I'm going to tie in with that just a point that someone's raised in the Q&A, which is for those areas that don't have any opportunity for sort of skills devolution programs. Obviously, joint working between departments, so for instance, MHLCG and DWP, DFE, is going to be crucial. And I just wondered whether you wanted to sort of highlight what goes on behind the scenes, your work sort of with other departments, how that actually happens. But I think it'd be quite interesting for the audience to know how departments do collaborate as well.
Absolutely, thanks, Chris. I think the sort of half answer to this question, if I can, is typical politician speak. I mean, firstly, the short answer to your overall question, is there going to be more scope for devolution? I think the categorical answer is yes. We absolutely want to do that and want to include skills devolution in that. Our view remains the fact that regardless whether it's an urban area, rural area, wherever it might be in our country, devolving power over skills drives improvement, because local areas and their communities they're best placed to deliver some of these programs. I think you're starting to see some of the impacts of that through the work we've done with metro mayors and mayoral combined authorities as well. Clearly, the Levelling Up white paper will set out the vast majority of the future funding policy in that position, but the Prime Minister is going to be speaking very, very shortly about this, so expect to hear more in the coming days about our plans. I think what I would say is that our approach here remains consistent, and I think will remain consistent, which is that we want to devolve and decentralise power. That's clear. We want locally led reorganisation. We are not moving into any world of top-down reform. That's not the government's direction. We believe in different solutions. This is not about picking up the West Mids model for devolution and trying to fit it into other parts of the country. We want to deliver flexible local solutions that work for places. We don't want people feel they're being forced into models that just don't work for them for whatever reason that might be. So we want to make sure it's tailored. I think one of the other things I reflect on is that towns and counties are an equally important part of our country, our society, our infrastructure as some of the big urban centres, and we don't believe they should be excluded from that conversation about devolution just because there is a model which is ill-fitting to that type of community. So that's a really important, I think, thing that we're thinking about. What is the future model there? And how can it be delivered? I think I'll probably let the Prime Minister answer the rest of that question in just a couple of days' time, for fear of being severely reprimanded. But and also the points that you've raised about working between different government departments is really important too. And perhaps I can use an example of perhaps of the UK Community Renewal Fund, which we're delivering in tandem with the Department for Work and Pensions. I mean, there was a long informed discussion between the MP and its CLG Treasury about the way to make sure that we injected the most possible expertise into this process, the ownership over some of these programs that we're going to be delivering. It was a competitive process, so local areas have submitted proposals to us, and the DWP will be taking the lead, even though our department is coordinating and assessing and understanding and adding value to those plans as they've come through. So we're really, really working closely with them. The second example perhaps is just on the capital-based levelling up funding, where a lot of those might be transport schemes, for example. So the DFT are providing the expertise in that respect. And actually we're going to go out across government in lots of these funds as well, to take representations from all departments and the devolved administrations as well, to make sure that they are providing input as well into these sorts of conversations. So it really is, depending on the type of scheme and policy outcome you're trying to deliver, designed around that to make sure we're sort of bringing in expertise from different government departments.
Thank you. And obviously, over this sort of past 18 months, local authorities have played an incredibly important role in the pandemic, supportive role. Many are now setting up sort of post-COVID recovery sort of programs, and we've heard from Damien some of the best practice when it comes to Doncaster's work around lifelong education. But how can we spread these examples of best practice that exist at a local level and try to raise them up to a national framework? Whether you had any thoughts on how we can inspire those local authorities who want to be involved in place-based approaches to education, don't know how. Where's the role for sort of government as an agency to highlight this? Where's the role for the Commission? Your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, this is my job to say this, so I would, but I really think it's true. I do think local government are in lots of ways the unsung heroes of this pandemic. They've been so remarkably flexible, dynamic in delivering solutions. I was the Minister for rough sleeping at the time when the pandemic hit. I remember that period last sort of March, April, May, when we asked councils to bring in every rough sleep across the country. And actually they contacted, outside of London, 99% of known rough sleepers across the country and offered them accommodation within a period of a few weeks. It was a remarkable remarkable response. And on that, you now see over 30,000 people moving from emergency situations into long-term housing pathways. So the response has been incredible. On the issue of sharing best practice, I think there's a number of different ways that government can and should be involved here. Firstly, there's the very traditional way that we have done this through providing leadership support through the local government organisation, other type of arrangements. So we essentially pay the local government association every year to provide support, and they do that in sharing best practice and other mechanisms as well. So it's a very traditional way that we've always done that. You just asked at the tailor end, I should object here, about how the Commission could add value to this conversation about sharing best practice. I think one of the really interesting things that the Commission can think about is how some of this best practice sharing government commissions can be better targeted at regionalised, localised, local authority-based improvement solutions. Now we do have a situation which sort of in some ways encourages government to commission support for councils across the country on, in some ways, an almost unilateral basis at a basic level. But actually, I think one of the things that we see now as we move into a real world of local leadership in delivering some of these funding is that what we don't want to end up is in a situation where individual councils really are struggling to have the capacity to bid for and deliver some of these funding programs. And I think one of the things that we're really thinking about is how can we help local authorities in that situation who might historically not be used to that sort of mechanism really get the expertise, share the expertise. I think there's much more for us to do centrally to think about how we target that support rather than provide blanket provision. So there's that sort of generic support that we provide as a government commission out traditionally. There's also, just to hark back to the rough sleeping example, ways that we sort of mandate this, I guess in some ways, but through the programs we deliver, but rely on local government expertise. So for example, in the most extreme examples where there are lots of rough sleepers, we ask councils to essentially mark each other's plans for delivering accommodation options and then support each other in the delivery of that using their expertise and matching out some similar types of communities across the country. So we do it through some of the programme options we deliver as well. I think two more ways I can very quickly. One is what we've really improved on during the pandemic is the way that we collect data from councils. We started collecting much more data about council spend, about council performance, about council outcomes in lots of ways. And that's been really useful, not least to make the argument to Treasury about the support the councils need, but also to have more information at our fingertips. We're now moving into a world of not necessarily needing to collect that every month, but we do want to look at how we can publish more data to drive competition, transparency, best practice sharing amongst councils as well. I think there's an important piece of work on transparency that we can do there, and that will help and drive progress. The last point I just highlight on this is on digital transformation, because we do quite a lot in this space now, where we're funding individual councils to do digital transformation projects, really transform the way they're delivering some services and starting to move online. There's some great examples how just through providing 100, 200, 300,000 pounds, you can enable a council to transform a service digitally, and then they are sharing the outcomes of that once it's past the required phases later on. So, for example, that might be in delivering child social care platforms, information online. It could be anything from planning reform as well. There are also some examples in the world of education as well, I think, and childcare provision. So I think we're funding a couple of £100,000 for developing common data models for children's services, statutory returns. Sounds quite a small dry point to make, but actually it's quite important in terms of sharing best practice as well. So a number of different ways we can do it, and definitely a way that I think you could help us in working out how to really target some councils better with government support in areas that need to build the capacity the most.
Can I ask a final question, the Minister, and then I think Philip wants to ask a question for the panellists as well. So we're seeing an increase in partnerships now emerging between universities, FE colleges, and obviously in certain areas, local authorities are also being involved in those partnerships as well. How do you feel partnerships be fostered and built upon? And I'm going to tie in just a question that's come up from one of the panelists, Charlotte Morris, which was actually, is there a role for local enterprise partnerships as well for the future in this work?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chris and Charlotte. I think in recent years there's been some I certainly think there's been some really encouraging partnership working. You're right, not just between universities and colleges, but also between councils as well. And clearly, ultimately, the successful delivery of services will just require that joined-up approach to nurturing talent in the way we want. We do want to foster more relationships like this, more local partnerships, probably especially at the college level, I think as well. I know the DFE are going out to consult on some of this soon. I think perhaps from an HCLG perspective, if I can, one of the main points that I would make here is that proper funding and resourcing delivered at a local level are fundamental to delivering some of the changes that we want to see. And that's sort of my view and our view. So perhaps I'd sort of hark back to the UK Community Renewal Fund example here. We're allowing universities, voluntary groups, community sector groups to work with councils to submit applications for transformative local projects, be that in skills, workforce training, capacity, and then they'll have to work with the councils to deliver those projects, sometimes over a number of years. So I think that is a new initiative that will be really positive. And crucially, of course, although that's just a one-year programme, that's really helping shape our thinking about the future design of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which is the bigger prize here in lots of ways as well. So I think that's really important. So we want universities, colleges to work with councils here, helping deliver some of these capital revenue-based programmes. Look, on local enterprise partnerships, look, I think that the starting point here for us is, how can we make sure we have an effective representation of the business voice in delivering, delivering some of these important transformations in be it high street regeneration, town centres, or skills programmes. That's really important, and we cannot lose that. We cannot lose such an important, effective voice. But equally want it to be accountable as well. So I think as we look to ramp up some of this funding that we're delivering, clearly we have the ongoing review of the LEPs and the Secretary of State in phase, and Robert Jemrick's thinking closely about that. So we'll keep updated as and when we can on that. But I certainly reassure you that I think nobody here is arguing that we should in any way lose or lessen the business representation voice that makes such a big difference.
Mr. Hall, thank you so much for the opportunity to listen to you today as part of this evidence session, launch of the second report for the Commission. I realise you may have to head off now, but I'm going to turn to Phillip Blond, who I think would like to ask a question of the wider panellists who sat very patiently listening to the Minister's responses, and maybe they might want to reflect also on what the Minister's said also. So Philip, hand over to you, please.
Thank you, and thank you, Minister. I'm often struck by how central government is very aware of the most innovative thinking and rightly tries to fund it. But I'm also aware at a local level that what really makes the difference is the presence of a controlling mind. And I always think it's a bit like the British Olympic team, that you've got multiple factors and you want to make improvements in each factor, but you want them all working together. And the trouble, I think, with and this predates this government, but the trouble with a kind of a Whitehall model for engendering transformation in left behind areas, it's siloed, it's in small pots of money that are quite onerous to apply for according to different kind of criteria. And everything goes also to different people. So you've got the employer's levy, you've got money going to the LEPs, you've got money going to universities and colleges. And it's very, very difficult outside of particularly charismatic chief executives or local leadership to coordinate all these manifold different bits of money within a holistic approach. And we know from multiple work that internationally, and we as Res Publica have probably worked with every single local authority, certainly in England, and we do a lot of great consultancy. And the biggest lack is the inability to create a single controlling mind for an area. That's almost the biggest barrier to transformation of those areas. And one way I think that we could approach this is through the ideal, it comes from, recall Heseltine's single regeneration budget. I think if we could at least pilot in an area the idea of a single budget for all post-16 education on which all the recipients of that budget sit. And so we can make holistic decisions for an area for that budget as a whole. And I just think that theoretically, and we know from evidence elsewhere, could be the step change that is needed, because many local authorities that we go to, you know, that they can't move. They lack either, they're too opposed, that it's too difficult. And it's actually quite a leap for local authorities to become the single controlling mind. And many of the places that are left behind essentially aren't able to create collaboration. So I'm just wondering, Minister, if I may, can we create something that, at least a pilot for that, and then a duty on anyone receiving funding to consult with the local authority, just to give them a chance to create this collaboration that could make the difference?
Thanks, Philip. I mean, I think the points that you've raised are absolutely legitimate. When we held all of the consultation events when we started to hold the consultation events for the successor to the EU structural funds, I think you just gave a very articulate summary of the 500 stakeholder responses we had in response to that. That they all talked about, you know, having more power over delivering funding, having less siloed, you know, bureaucratic pillars, they were called, the EU structural funds to deliver. So that's absolutely a key thing that we're trying to trial through the UK CRF. So I completely understand that point. And also the sort of general representation you make about freedom and flexibility of areas to deliver is one I think is echoed by lots of the metro mayors that are already in place around the country. So we're certainly thinking about that in advance of levelling up white paper. Do listen out for the Prime Minister's speech later this week. I guess the only other point I would slightly add is that having accepted the vast majority of what you said, I also think in some respect it goes further than that for councils, in that it's not two more points. One is it's not just on the local growth funding. This is a problem for councils. You know, one of the biggest complaints that I hear day to day is, you know, why are you ring fencing, you know, far too much of my budget that comes into councils. I think we really want to look at that and make sure we're, you know, understanding that we are delivering in the right places, the flexibility to deliver the right sort of programmes. There's clearly a balance there between trying to deliver central government priorities and using the ring fencing mechanisms to do that, and giving councils the power to crack on with what they want to do. I think most councils would argue, and I think we would probably disagree, that there is a lot of ring fencing that could be just removed generally. And the last point is just on local leadership. I think local leadership is just absolutely critical, and it comes back to this point, doesn't it, about, you know, mayors may well be right for some parts of the country, they may well not be right for parts of the country. If there is good, strong local leadership that can deliver for a community, we should be supporting that with devolution and, you know, further freedoms as well. So I think we're sort of, you know, absolutely in the market for all of this, and you know, listen out to what the PM is going to say very shortly.